What causes fetishes? I'm Dr. Trish Leigh. Let me tell you what is at the root. Okay, in this video, we are going to cover three main topics. Number one, we're going to talk about the two main reasons that fetishes develop in the first place. Secondly, then we're going to talk about how fetishes grow and increase over time. Lastly, I'm going to tell you what you can do to decrease a fetish if that's something that you're interested in doing. And I will tell you, likely you'll be interested at some point if you're not interested right now, because fetishism is actually in the DSM and it's in ICD-10, which makes it an issue for people because it does grow and develop. So if you're not concerned about it now, and if you keep building those neural pathways, likely you'll be concerned at some point. Okay, but stay with me until the end because I'm going to give you one very powerful bonus brain tip at the end that you can start using today to help your cause. Okay, let's dive in. Number one, what causes fetishes? Well, there's two main reasons that a fetish usually develops in the teenage years for young men in particular, and science shows that men are affected by fetishism much more than women are, and that fetishism falls into certain categories. And honestly, I'm looking at the science, and the science I looked at is a few years old. So I know that's likely changing with the massive increase of pornography consumption that's happening these days. But the categories that fetishism falls into is certain body parts, clothing, rubber, leather, and bodily functions. So that can be an issue for people in multiple different categories. So what causes it is that there's two main reasons. Reason number one is trauma. So if you fall into this category, likely there's trauma in your childhood or your early teenage years that made it so that you were able to seek refuge in a certain act or a certain body part, and it was coupled. And honestly, that's reason number two. That happens no matter what, but it can be because of trauma in the first place for some young men. So what happens is there's family dysfunction, or there's a lot of chaos in your home or your life, and then you may seek refuge in putting on your mother's clothing, and that makes you feel calmer and more relaxed. It goes back to your brain and your nervous system. Your nervous system either needs to be, number one, stimulated, or number two, calmed, or likely a combination of the both. So when you find this act or this thing, it gives you the stimulation and the calming that your brain is looking for. That's how it develops. So if it comes out of trauma or dysfunction, it's because your world is so chaotic and you found something that finally gives your brain the dopamine that it's looking for to feel calm and to feel good and to give you some control in a world that you don't feel you have a lot of control in. So that may happen. Now, a second aspect to trauma is that it could also be something that was involved in some type of abuse that you suffered. And I know many people don't know this, nor do they understand it. And it's a very complex neural mechanism at play. But if something bad, abuse was done to you using a certain object or a certain act, your brain will go back to that to reenact it, to have control over what you didn't have control in the past. And that is a trauma-based reason that a fetish might develop. So if there's a certain sexual act that you are really interested in and you know that that was done to you when you were younger, it is your brain craving control over something that was done to you. There's other ways to get that control. And I'm going to tell you a few in the brain tip, but stay with me. But there's ways you can gain control and you don't have to keep acting out in that way to keep trying to get control over something that's happened in the past. Honestly, the way out is through, unfortunately, but you can make it through, and then you will no longer need to participate in that act. Okay, so moving on to number two, which I've already told you is coupling. So what is coupling? Coupling is when the act or the item or the body part is coupled with that massive supernormal stimulus, dump of dopamine and other neurochemicals that give you pleasure and reduce pain in your brain. And that act is coupled with all of that neurochemical release. So we've talked about in other videos, it's a supernormal stimulus. If you're watching pornography that has that act in it, it is just dumping massive amount of chemicals into your brain that you can't possibly get in the world. And that's what makes it super normal. So if you keep doing it over and over and over and over, especially if you're coupling it with masturbation, what happens is that is just giving your brain just this massive pleasure and pain reduction feeling that you can't get elsewhere. And if you continue to groove those neural pathways, you are going to continue to hardwire that in. So your brain needs that very thing, that act, that body part, that clothing, that, whatever it might be. It needs that thing to get that hyper aroused state with that huge dopamine dump that your brain has found in this coupling. So we're going to talk about the key to success in a minute, but it's not rocket science. You need to uncouple that, and we'll get there. Okay, so that's the first thing. What causes fetishes? Now, if you're getting value from these videos, please consider liking and subscribing. It will only help the both of us. Okay, so number 2 is, what is happening when a fetish begins to increase and grow? And now if you've felt this, and we've talked about it in other videos, where if you continue to couple whatever you're watching with masturbation, it's going to increase and grow because of tolerance. Just like in alcoholism, you're going to need more in quantity, you're going to need more in frequency, and you're going to need more in intensity to get the same level of feeling of pleasure and pain reduction that you get from the neurochemicals. So the same happens with fetishes. It's going to grow. So what happens is, if you're watching something on the screen and you are coupling it with this dopamine dump, and it's not anything you ever thought you would do or want to do, and then before you know it, you find that you want to explore and try that, even though it's crossing your moral boundary, it's increasing and growing because of the coupling. So the idea is, my family's from Ireland, I'm Irish, and so let's just say that you took a trip to Ireland and it was just the most amazing trip you've ever taken. The food was delicious, the green hills of the countryside were absolutely beautiful, you hit all the pubs and you found all these fun Irish people to hang out with and to sing and to drink some pints. You just had the best time in Ireland. So now, when you came home, you just keep thinking about going back to Ireland. And when you were in Ireland, your brain was getting all that dopamine and neurochemicals. And Ireland just put you in just that flow state that just made you feel so relaxed and engaged and calm and focused. So now when you come home and you think about Ireland, your brain's releasing dopamine. Even though you're not in Ireland anymore, your brain is releasing those chemicals and you're feeling pleasure and that relaxation. Just thinking about that trip to Ireland is giving you that dopamine release in your brain. It's the same thing with fetishes, that when you watch it on the screen, you don't even have to be watching it. You can just be thinking about it and your brain is releasing dopamine. And this is when it can become a really big problem for people, because it's creating this bubble or this kind of little drip of dopamine all the time as you continue to think about it. So it can put you in this enhanced, artificial / terrible, if you've seen my other videos, state of flow, because it's not real. And especially if you let yourself linger there for too long, that's when you'll have really big withdrawal symptoms, because you won't be able to engage in your world anymore, because you just keep thinking about getting back to that thing that is giving your brain that massive dopamine dump. It's all about your brain, and it's all about the neurochemicals flowing through it. Okay, so number 3, how do we stop this? If you're interested in stopping it, you have to uncouple it. You have to stop thinking about it. You have to stop rewarding it. And you have to stop the dopamine dump that is going into your brain when you watch it, when you do it, or when you think about it. All three of them. And likely, like I've already said, if you're watching it and you're thinking about it, you're trying to make it happen in your life. And if you have a partner, a lot of the times those fetishes won't fly with your partner. So if it hasn't shown up in your world and created problems for yourself yet, it's bound to. So it's probably time to back it out, especially depending upon how extreme it is. Okay, so how do you do that? The way that you do that is by establishing healthy sexuality and healthy habits instead. I know. How do you do that? Well, you need to stop watching it. You need to stop masturbating to watching it or thinking about it, because that's the coupling that's creating the dopamine dump. You can deliver yourself a little correction every time you think about it so that you are no longer getting the dopamine dump, because if you give yourself a pinch every time you think about it, you will now have a little bit of pain associated with the thought instead of the pleasure and the pain reduction that you're getting from your brain. You will kind of break that pattern interrupt, as I call it, so that you're no longer moving in that direction. We need you to start moving away from that direction. So you need to uncouple it, stop watching it, stop thinking about it, and stop trying to do it. And now I'm going to give you the brain tip in just 1 second, because the brain tip is actually how you can create healthy sexuality over time. Okay, here's the brain tip. You ready for it? The brain tip is, it's based on 2 specific types of therapy. The first one is called behavioral activation. So you hear me talk about this in different ways pretty frequently. What behavioral activation is that you want to positively reinforce appropriate sexual behaviors. Now, we're always consumed about how to stop the thing we don't want to do. But to be really successful at that, we need to focus on the thing we want to do. So I want you, and you might not be able to do it right now if you're really caught up in this, but I want you to think about what your sexual relationship really should be like if it was healthy. And it should be relational with somebody else, not with yourself, not with a screen. It should be relational, and it should be able to give you joy and pleasure and, wait for it, connection. It should be able to give you connection. So when you are thinking about those types of activities, and when you're doing those types of activities, your brain will start to release dopamine. At first, it's going to be lower levels. I know I can't do anything about it, because you need to get that super normal stimulus, whole jacked up brain out of your system before you can move on. It's just a hump you're going to have to get over. And in other videos, I give you tips on how to get over that hump. But that's the way out, is to anchor into something in the future that will give you that joy and pleasure. And another way to get around thinking about the past is, I want you to literally write down what pain or what consequences, the worst thing that's happened to you because of your fetish. And likely if someone's found out about it, or if it's entered into your relationship, there's some consequence. And then I want you to think of that thought instead of going towards it when you have the urge. Because if your spouse found out about it, or if you got in trouble at work because of it, those are major consequences. Anchor into that in the past, and anchor into your new, better behaviors in the future, so that you can behaviorally activate your brain towards the direction that you want to go. Okay, last brain tip is a sensate focused therapy. And this only works if you have a partner. So instead of, when you're with your partner, thinking about how you're going to get this fetish going, because I've already told you, she's probably not into it. What you can do is spend time didactically, both of you, touching each other's bodies and being able to actually feel the sensation, so that you can start to gain that dopamine dump from healthy intimacy. I know it might sound boring to you right now, but it won't be over time if you can create the neural pathways that will help you to establish this into the future. Okay, so if you want help being able to overcome fetishes, my program at drtrishleigh.com is a top-down approach using brain training and a bottom-up approach using behavioral tips and techniques that are built on cognitive neuroscience. So what we're going to do is recondition your brain from both ways of the street so that you can break this pattern, interrupt it, create a new pattern, hardwire that new pattern in so you can ride off into the sunset. So if you're interested in that, go to my website, check it out, and I would love to work with you to help you to be able to move through this. Okay, so remember, control your brain or it'll control you.